What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube. Oh, I'm not wearing my hat. Take two. What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled, as always, by the lovely folks at NerdTees, and welcome to week 17 of my weekly CFL football pick show for the 2018 CFL season and postseason. The shirt might have brought us the tiniest modicum of luck last week, although not enough to allow me to remember my hat at the beginning of the episode. Straight up, we went 2-2 last week, so, we'd like to be better than 2-2, but, we only went 2-2. It's still 500, that's fine. 38-23 straight up on the season, that's a 62% straight up clip. We'd like to be closer to 65-70. We're trying to work towards that. 3-1 against the spread. That's a good against the spread week for us here. 3-1 against the spread has us 32-29 picking the games against the spread this season. That's 52%, crawling ever closer to 55. Over under 2-2. So we were 500 across the board last week, which is excellent. 2-2. We were 31-28 on the season with the two pushes over under. That's 51% plus the two pushes. That has us 101-80 with the two pushes on the season. That's 55.19% as we push closer to 60, hopefully by the end of the season, but we got a lot of work to do to get there. Update you on the CFL standings starting in the East Division. Ottawa out front in the East with an 8-5 record, outscoring opponents 25-23. Hamilton is right at 500 now, an even record of 7-7, and they're on the bye this week, outscoring opponents 29-24. Toronto and Montreal each still only have 3 wins. Toronto has them in 13 games, Montreal in 14. Toronto being outscored by opponents on average 32-22. Montreal being outscored 31-18. In the West Division, we have our first playoff clinch, and that is the Calgary Stampeders, to the surprise of absolutely no one who's been paying attention. Calgary now 11-2 on the season, outscoring opponents 32-20, and they got the little X by their name. That means they're in. Saski, second place now in the West Division. The Roughriders 9-5, even scoring there 26-26. Winnipeg and Edmonton are now both 7-7, so they're only 500. Winnipeg outscoring opponents by 6, 30-24. Edmonton scoring now even on the season, 27-27. Defensive problems there for sure. The BC Lions, one game under 500 at 6-7, but still very much alive for that crossover into the playoffs, being outscored 26-23. Our 4-game slate this week sees the Ottawa REDBLACKS playing host to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, Toronto traveling to BC to take on the Lions, Calgary is in Montreal, and Edmonton heads to Saski for a critical West Division matchup. So let's start with that Winnipeg-Ottawa matchup in the nation's capital. Both of these teams coming into these games off of back-to-back wins. Winnipeg 3-4 on the road, but again, they've won 2 straight games. It's notable this is back-to-back road games for the Blue Bombers. Again, I mention it all the time in the NFL. It's a thing no matter what level of football you're playing at. So back-to-back road games here for Winnipeg. Blue Bombers coming in off of a 30-3 decimation of the Edmonton Eskimos last week. Kevin Fogg and the Blue Bombers defense forcing 7 turnovers in that football game. They turned those 7 turnovers into 20 points, but even if they would have generated 0 points off those turnovers, they still would have won the game by a touchdown. That game was not competitive. I can't call that a good football game from Matt Nichols at the quarterback position, but what he was what I like to call hyper efficient. He only had 179 yards passing, doesn't exactly jump off the page at you, but he threw for 80%. I think he was 16 of 20 or 20 of 24. No, 16 of 20, I think it was. So, that's 80%. Anytime you got a quarterback that throws 80% in a game, clearly he was doing something right. Just didn't exactly have the yardage to show for it. Blue Bombers playing incredibly disciplined lately as well. Only 4 accepted penalties against them in the last 2 games. They only had 1 in this football game. And in that game, it really helped them make up for the fact that the first down offense was pretty mediocre, pretty lackluster in that game. I think only 3.2 yards per attempt on first down. That really sets you up in really disadvantageous second and long situations. And in a 3-down league, that can really hurt you. Now, they were great on second down, but that first down offense, they got to work on that this week. And the run game wasn't that great either. Only exactly 3 yards per carry on the ground for the Blue Bombers in that game. game. That could come into play here against an Ottawa team that's pretty good against the run. As I mentioned, Red Blacks coming in winners of 2 straight games, 4-2 at home this season, so they're a pretty good road team, coming off of a 28-15 victory, also over the Edmonton Eskimos. That was back in Week 15. The Red Blacks got 7 field goals in that game from their rookie kicker Lewis Ward, and Rico Murray coming up with a goal line interception that, had that gone for a touchdown, which it would have if he wouldn't have been there, that would have given the Eskimos the lead. That could have been an entirely different football game from that point out. Rico Lewis' goal line interception was a great play, and in a lot of ways probably preserved the win. Both teams in that game, Ottawa and Edmonton, had touchdowns taken off the board due to either play call reversals or penalties that took the touchdowns off the board. 18 total penalties in that football game, 9 per side. Discipline is an issue here, especially against a Winnipeg team that really doesn't take penalties. What's not an issue for Ottawa, however, is the run game. William Powell, monstrous in that game 2 weeks ago. 23 carries for $147 on the ground. And Trevor Harris had a fairly strong game. He threw for 77%, 313 yards, threw a touchdown, threw a pick. But he did get sacked 6 times. So Ottawa's got to worry about that protection there as well. Because when he gets some protection, their quarterback can do good things, even as critical of him as I've been this season. I think this is actually a super, super tight game, but as I was looking at it, what kind of started jumping out at the page at me was in areas where Winnipeg is great, I find that Ottawa tends to struggle. Discipline is a big one. Ottawa's taking penalties, Winnipeg is not, but also on the line of scrimmage, the defensive line versus the offensive line, especially for Winnipeg. Ottawa gives up the 3rd most sacks allowed in the CFL. Winnipeg has the 4th most sacks in the league. So that's a battle that Ottawa can't lose if they want to win this game. I understand that it's back-to-back road games, but with how tight that West Division is now, especially for the crossover or to not have to play in the crossover, I feel like Winnipeg's got to be the hungrier team here. Like, Ottawa doesn't have to win this game because the team that's right behind them is on bye this week. So they can't gain that game back on them. So it's not a must-win game for Ottawa. I don't think Ottawa's selling out to win football games yet. I feel like Winnipeg has to. So as the more desperate team, even though it's a back-to-back road situation, I think I'm going to take Winnipeg here. It's a bit of an upset, but I think I'm going to take the Blue Bombers in Ottawa to hang a loss on the Red Blacks. On the line, Ottawa's favored by 1.5 at home, so obviously I like Winnipeg to win, so I'm going to be on Winnipeg plus 1.5. Total in the game is set at 52.5 points, and this is a pretty damn near perfect total as far as I'm concerned. This is, I think, going to be relatively close to what the final total actually is. The two teams are 13-12 over under, so no particular lean one way or the other. Now, 71% of people making picks on covers, which is my resource of choice. 71% are on the over, but I don't think I'm going to go that way. Ottawa's only giving up about 20 points a game at home. Winnipeg's only giving up about 20 points a game on the road. So this is just kind of a gut play for me. I think this game stays under. So I'm going to go with my gut, and I'm going to stay under the 52.5 point total. Let's travel to BC now, which no team has enjoyed doing this season, as the Lions are going to welcome in the Toronto Argonauts. Toronto ice cold at this point. They've lost 5 consecutive games. They are still winless on the road at 0-6. And this just happens to be back-to-back road games for the Argos. Toronto coming off of a 3-possession loss to the Calgary Stampeders, which there's a number of teams that can say that this season, losing that game 38-16. But that was a 4-point football game at the half, and at one point, the Argos had a lead. So that was a close game for about the first half with the best team in the CFL, and that's important for the Argos. But, I mean, they had nothing for them basically after the beginning of the second half. They virtually had nothing for them. I'm not going to say that I called Medeiros missing a field goal, but I mean, I did kind of point it out on the video, and it did kind of happen. That is now 4 games in Medeiros' last 5 where he has missed a field goal. What did I say last week about bad teams? In fact, virtually all of Toronto's scoring in this game, which there were a couple of touchdowns, obviously, as you can tell by the points, virtually all of it came from the quarterbacks, but it was the quarterbacks on the ground. Both McLeod Bethel Thompson and James Franklin had a rushing touchdown in this football game, which is fine. That was 13 of their 16 points that they scored in the entire game. So great, they scored a couple of touchdowns, but I mean, it would be preferable for quarterbacks to get them through the air, I guess is what I'm saying. BC Lions lost last week, but they're coming into a very favorable situation where they are 5-1 at home. So a very big home field advantage, kind of a Jekyll and Hyde team. They were certainly Hyde last week. They were trying to hide from the Hamilton Tiger Cats, who beat them 40-10. Woof. The Lions get burned by a returning Brandon Banks, who goes 9 for 79 with 2 touchdowns, and just ineptitude at the quarterback position. I'm going to quote one of the guys in the CFL chat. I believe it was TK who made the quote basically as soon as this game started, "Uh-oh, it's Bad Jennings." Well, Bad Jennings definitely returned in that football game. 146 yards passing, 3 lame duck interceptions. He was relieved by Cody Fajardo. Is it Fajardo or Fajardo? I always want to say Fajardo, but I think it's Fajardo. Cody Fajardo comes in. He was less efficient. He threw for 58%. If Jonathan Jennings did one thing right, he threw for 68%. So, I mean, he was efficient. He was just really bad when he wasn't efficient. So, Fajardo was less efficient, but he did throw a touchdown pass. I mean, it's pretty cut and dry for the Lions in that game. You can't spot a team 30 points in the first half and expect to be competitive. And I made a bunch about, how BC's pass rush was just going to dominate Hamilton's O-line. The pass rush did not get home in that game. They only recorded 1 sack. If they can't sack the quarterback against Hamilton, Hamilton's probably going to beat them. This game for me all comes back to the fact that, again, BC is such a weird situational team. They're monsters at home, and on the road, they're kind of kittens. They're lions and kittens, if you will. There's an interesting article on the CFL website right now that lists the strength of schedule for the remainder of the season. The BC Lions have the toughest strength of schedule for the rest of the regular season. I think the winning percentage of the rest of their opponents on average is like 615 or something like that. So it's the toughest. In that situation, this game is a must-win. You cannot lose to Toronto. If you want to get that crossover spot, you cannot lose to Toronto this week. Luckily, I don't think they do lose to Toronto this week. I'm definitely on the Lions in this game at home. Let's take the Lions at home to beat Toronto. Toronto's going to stay winless on the road and probably don't win a road game this year. On the line, the Lions are favored by a full touchdown. It's -7 points, which initially felt kind of like a lot to me, but then as the more I looked at it, I was like, they're going to cover that, especially with the defense. So we're going to take BC -7 in that game. Not only are BC 5-1 straight up at home, they're also 5-1 against the spread at home, and they have covered a number this size or larger at home this season. So I think they cover it against a bad opponent. So let's take BC -7. Total in the game is 51.5 points. Again, it's another fairly good total. The two teams are combined 11, 13, and 1 on the over-under, so that's a bit of a stronger lean towards the under. And look, BC are barely allowing 20 points a game at home on defense. I don't think Toronto gets to 20 this week. Maybe they get to double digits, but I think this thing comfortably stays under. So let's stay under 51.5 points in BC Toronto. Before we move on, we'll take a break as we always do to plug our good friends at NerdTees, nerdtees.ca. Use that promo code BWFinest. Going to save yourself 15% at checkout if you order over $50. Free shipping in Canada. And if you're in the US, boom, one little mouse click turns everything into US dollars. You get a great conversion rate on the US dollar right now. Today's blend is an old faithful, an old stalwart of mine, and I finally got it back, and I'm so happy that I have it back now. It's watermelon oolong. It is such a good tea. It's a good tea hot. It's a good tea cold. It's flavorful. It smells great. The second you open the bag, it's like, oh, I'm in a watermelon field. This is amazing. It's such a good tea. I've never tried oolong tea before. This was the first oolong tea I ever tried. And yeah, it's good stuff. Go to nerdtees.ca. Don't forget that promo code BWFinest. Save yourself 15%. Find yourself something to love, or find someone you love something to love. You're going to get it on nerdtees.ca with the promo code BWFinest. Let's go to Montreal now, where the Alouettes will welcome in the playoff clinched Calgary Stampeders. Calgary winners of 2 consecutive games. Stamps are 4-2 on the road this season, and they're coming off of that aforementioned 38-16 win over the Toronto Argos. They score through the air, they score on the ground, en route to clinching that playoff spot. That's got to be a very, very, very comfortable feeling for the Stamps. Hey, Bo Levi Mitchell wasn't mediocre. He still threw for sub 60%, which again, it's so weird for me. But he threw 300 plus yards. He threw 2 touchdowns. He didn't throw any interceptions, but they did lose Reggie Begelton. Stampeders didn't generate a ton on the ground in this game, despite it basically being a runaway game in the second half. Just 15 carries on the ground. Now, they did turn those 15 carries into $109 in yardage. So, I mean, that is 7.3 yards per carry. But I'd like to see Calgary maybe running the ball a little bit more, especially in a game like that, at the end of the third quarter is really not all that competitive. The Montreal Alouettes, after winning back-to-back games, have since dropped 3 consecutive games. They're only 1-6 at home this season. Not a great spot for them. Coming off of a 5-point loss to the Saskatchewan Roughriders, which was a pretty entertaining game. One of the more entertaining games in the CFL this season. Johnny Manziel throws not only his first CFL touchdown pass on some razzle-dazzle, a real trick play that worked out, he threw his second one as well on a great play where he avoids a sack and then throws a bullet. It might not have been a victory on the football field, but it was totally a moral victory for Johnny Manziel. Little concerning for the Alouettes that Manziel was more effective running the football than William Stanback. I mean, they've kind of given William Stanback the proverbial and the literal ball here to run the run offense since they traded Tyrell Sutton. Stanback only drew 31 yards on 8 carries, only 3.9 yards a carry. He did add 24 yards on 2 receptions, so maybe they can deploy him a little more in the pass game as well, kind of turn him into that Andrew Harris prototype. I mean, ultimately, Montreal just didn't possess the ball enough to make things happen. They got dominated in time of possession in this game. Now, they did go 3-0 in the turnover battle, so they did generate 3 turnovers off of the Roughriders, which kept this football game close. They did not turn over the ball in their own right. Honestly, another possession or two, Montreal may have won that football game. I got to be honest, though, even if the Stamps start sitting players, I think it's too early to do that, so I don't think that's going to happen this week. But even if they did start sitting players, Calgary won't lose to Montreal. I think this one's a little bit of a layup here. We're going to take the Calgary Stampeders in Montreal to beat the Alouettes. I may have even been a little more willing to take Montreal's side of this if the game was in Calgary, because Montreal's been better on the road than they have been at home. So Calgary over Montreal in Montreal is the straight-up pick. On the line, Montreal are 12.5-point dogs at home. And I feel like Montreal has already covered this number against Calgary this year. I could be totally wrong in saying that, but I seem to remember something similar. It might have even been a bigger number than that. Montreal may be only 1-5, was it? 1-5 at home or 1-6 at home? But they are 5-1 against the spread when they're an underdog of more than 10 points. So 5 times in the 6 times that they've been an underdog of 10.5 or higher, they've won that game against the spread. I think they do that this week. Calgary's not a blowout team, and especially not now that they've clinched. They're not going to blow Montreal out of the water because they have absolutely no reason to. Total in the game is 50.5 points. This is very simple for me. The two teams are a combined 10-16 over-under this season. That's a very strong lean to the under for me. Let's stay under on it. We're going to go under the 50.5 point total in Calgary-Montreal. And the last game we're going to look at this week sees the Edmonton Eskimos travel to Saskatchewan to take on the Roughriders, and this is a story of 2 teams going in opposite directions. Edmonton is going in a poor direction. They've lost 2 straight games. They're only 2-5 on the road, so they're not a team that travels very well, coming off of that aforementioned 30-3 blowout loss to the Blue Bombers. And I quote myself from last week in saying, if Mike Riley struggles, the Eskimos are in deep. They're not a team that's built to win when Mike Riley is not Mike Riley. How badly did Riley struggle? The Eskimos averaged more yardage with CJ Gable on the ground, like average per play, than they did with Mike Riley through the air. Now, a big reason why that was the case is Riley didn't exactly get the protection that I think he needs. He was sacked 4 times in that game. He was hit a few more than that. Again, That's too many, and that's evidenced by the fact that Mike Riley left this football game with about 4.5 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Granted, it was a blowout. They weren't coming back from 27 points down at that point, but still, he got hit a few times. He got sacked too many times. They just pull him for the end of the game. So you got to protect your bread and butter. Like, Mike Riley is that team in the same way that, like, the Indianapolis Colts in the NFL are not built to win without Andrew Luck. The Green Bay Packers are not built to win without Aaron Rodgers. In the exact same way, the Eskimos are not built to win without Mike Riley playing like Mike Riley. You look to the green and white sideline. Saski has won 2 straight games. They're above 500 at home at 4-3. Not lighting the world on fire, but at least they've won more than they've lost. And they're coming off that 5-point win against Montreal, 34-29. Zach Collaros finally woke up, kind of. He threw for 70% and 394 yards, and those numbers are excellent. However, he only found the end zone once, and he did turn the ball over twice. So but... My criticisms of the Riders over the last couple of weeks have mostly been answered in that game. They dominated time of possession, which they needed to do, which I said it would be a problem against better competition if they didn't. So they dominated time of possession in that game. They dominated on the ground, 23 carries for $118 and 3 rushing touchdowns. Another thing that I might not have needed to see, but I was so happy, just so happy in my heart. That's the right side, isn't it? It sure is. Chiron More. Chiron Moore breaks out. Chiron Moore has arrived, and 2 weeks ago, I think it was 2 weeks ago, I called that. I said Chiron Moore is the breakout star in this receiving core, and if he gets some chemistry with Zach Collaros, he's going to be dangerous. What happened last week? 9 catches. He came into the game with 10 on the season. 126 yards. He came into the game with 188, and his first CFL receiving touchdown. This kid's only like 21, 22 years old. This kid's going to be great in the CFL. This was his breakout game. This coming week, he is going to announce that he has arrived. I think Chiron Moore is going to torch the Eskimos this week. The Riders obviously are taking a step up in competition this week. They're not playing the Alouettes this week, but the Esks' poor play, just the way they've been playing the last couple of weeks, I got to fade the Eskimos until I see them kind of turn the corner, especially on the defensive side. So I don't think they're going to go into Saskatchewan and beat the Roughriders. We're going to take Saski at home to beat Edmonton. On the line, Roughriders are favored by 4 points at home. It's not a huge price to pay, maybe a little bit more than you'd like. I'd like to see that number at 3, but it's still a relatively small price to pay. Edmonton are only 2-5 against the spread away from home this season, so I just don't think they cover this number. The Eskimos, that is. I'm going to be on Saski -4 in this game, so we're going to hammer the Roughriders. Total in the game is 52.5 points, and this, I think, is the one game this week that I think goes over the point total. The two teams are a combined 15, 11, and 1 over-under this season. That's good enough for me. Let's go over the 52.5 point total in Edmonton, Saski. Chiron More. All right, folks, those are your Week 17 picks in the Canadian Football League. We'll go over the picks here with you one more time. I've got Winnipeg in Ottawa hanging a loss on the Red Blacks. I like Winnipeg plus 1.5 against the spread in a game that stays under the 52.5 point total. I like BC at home to beat the Toronto Argos. I also like BC to cover the -7 against the spread in a game that stays under 51.5 points. I've got the Calgary Stampeders on the road in Montreal beating the Alouettes, but I do like Montreal plus 12.5 against the spread in a game that stays under the 50.5 points. And in the final game of the week, I like the Saskatchewan Roughriders at home to beat the Edmonton Eskimos, handing Edmonton, I believe, their 3rd straight loss. I like Saski -4 against the spread in a game that goes over the 52.5 points. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for me. Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the good folks at Nerd Tees and wearing my hat. Enjoy the games in Week 17. We will see you again in Week 18 as we draw ever closer to the end of the regular season and the CFL playoffs. So excited.